focus, discipline. This is the Zero Excuses podcast. Each and every week, we talk to high-performing, inspirational athletes, entrepreneurs, and leaders. We ask powerful questions to extract their tools, strategies, and life lessons for you to crush your excuses, to break out of your comfort zone, and accomplish your ambitious dreams and goals. Here's your host, Kenyon Zitska.
What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to the Zero Excuses podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to join us here today. Today we have the host of the All Around Adventure podcast, Josh Guerrero, join us to share his adventures and how he came to be such an adventure seeker. He's a Marine veteran and also served time in the Peace Corps, and he shares a ton of interesting stories about his time in the Marine Corps and his time over in West Africa. And he also shares some very, very practical tips and strategies that we can implement in our day-to-day lives so that we can start to have some of these adventures that we are after. But before we get to all that, as always, got a few quick reminders for you guys. First, if you haven't already done so, would appreciate it if you head over to iTunes, kenyonzitska.com/iTunes. It'll take you right to the Zero Excuses podcast homepage there, and you could leave us a review, a rating, and also subscribe and share this with a friend or family member who needs to hear some of the topics and strategies we talk about here on the show. Second, if you want to take these conversations to the next level, you can do so by joining our free closed Facebook group at kenyonzitska.com/group, and you can just click the join button and it'll walk you through a couple quick questions and you'll be off and running there. And if that's not quite enough for you, we also have a couple opportunities to work a little closer with me. First is our Infinite Results Mastermind group. That's by application only. You can apply to be a part of that at kenyonzitska.com/results. And if you would like to work with me one-on-one, I also have a discipline coaching program that I'm taking folks on a wait list only at the moment. You can apply at kenyonzitska.com/discipline. And lastly, I'm teaming up with my good friend from Fatherhood for the Rest of Us, Brandon Hanley, to lay a solid foundation for 2019. You know, we all have New Year's resolutions, and we all get put on the spot to come up with New Year's resolutions at the last minute. But we're going to spend 10 weeks breaking down mental barriers and doing the work to really lay a solid vision for 2019 and for the rest of your life. If that's something that interests you, if you're tired of making hollow New Year's resolutions and not, just staying stuck in the same place year after year, this is definitely something for you. It's not for you if you're just going to show up and not do any work or invest the time and energy that is required to lay this foundation. You can hit me up directly via email, kenyon.zitska@gmail.com, and we'll get you set up to be a part of that program. All right, enough of all that. Let's get into today's conversation. Josh Guerrero from the All Around Adventure podcast joining us here today. Thanks for taking time out of what I'm sure is a busy evening for you to talk to us about what you're all about. And, we're basically just continuing a conversation that started over on your podcast when you were gracious enough to bring me on over there. So I'm excited to keep going with that here.
Yeah, likewise, man. And, no problem at all. I definitely was excited to get a chance to come on your show and continue this conversation. So great to be here, man.
Yeah. So what is your, big mission with with your podcast? What's your 30,000 foot view there?
Well, I'd say the name All Around Adventure has kind of evolved since I started it. Initially, when I started All Around Adventure, as the name implies, using the term all around, that means versatile, well-rounded. And that kind of reflected me personally as a traveler and as an adventurer, because I've always found myself pretty at home, I guess I would say, anywhere I would travel to. Put me in a bustling city and I can keep up with the fast pace and be just fine. Put me out in the middle of nature and I will just soak in the sounds, the scenery, everything. I also like to scuba dive. I've done a little bit of rock climbing, and I've even lived in rural villages in West Africa, which I'm sure we'll be talking about as we continue on this conversation. But so that's what it kind of started out as. However, it sort of evolved because I had realized that when I had started All Around Adventure that I was making it a little bit more about myself and wasn't really adding a whole lot of value. I mean, I was just kind of sharing my stories, maybe mostly just for entertainment purposes, but I'm thinking to myself, yeah, these may be entertaining stories, but how is it actually really helping my audience? So initially it started off as a travel blog, but then eventually I transitioned to the podcast. So that way I could have this new platform to be able to talk about my adventures a little bit more and also share life lessons that I've learned along the way. And I do the same thing with the guests that I bring on the show as well. I get good, entertaining travel stories from them, extract some of their life lessons, and for some, their expertise. I've had entrepreneurs, I've had a couple of military veterans come on to share like different skill sets and things like that I share with my listeners. So now the mission of All Around Adventure, as the name still kind of implies to that, is helping people become all around better people with whatever it is they're looking to pursue in their lives.
Awesome. And, living a life of adventure, there's a lot of people who are stuck behind their day jobs, their desks, their computers, and they're longing to hear some of these, how people can, get out from behind these 9-to-5, jobs that they find themselves stuck in, sometimes working 40, 50 hours a week. And, I love what you're doing with the podcast and really illustrating that, that's not what life is about. Life is about, experiencing things, and it's not about what you accumulate, but it's the things that you experience that are going to last a lifetime. So I just wanted to, share a little bit of appreciation for what you're doing on the show here, because I think it's much needed breath of fresh air and this big sea of podcasts. So just wanted to say that up front here. But what is your background? I know you've done some time in the Marine Corps, the Peace Corps. Where did this sense of adventure really start to take off for you?
Well, strangely enough, it wasn't actually in the Marine Corps, which I'm sure probably maybe some of the listeners might have thought that it would have. Yeah. But, because I think at the time when I had joined the Marine Corps, this was literally right after high school. And I mean, 3 weeks after I was walking across the stage at graduation, I was on a plane to San Diego to, get my ass kicked at boot camp. Yep. But, at the time I was only 18 years old. So I was still a little bit of a homebody. I was missing my family and all my friends back home. And anytime I would get a chance to, use leave to travel, it would usually be back home. I mean, I did get to travel a little bit with my unit. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to deploy. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, I guess that could be up for interpretation. But so I didn't deploy, but I did get a chance to travel around the U.S. quite a bit. But even still then, it just didn't really seem like there wasn't a lot of excitement to it, like as much as it would be now. But what kind of changed for me was actually when I got out of the Marine Corps and I actually went to college when I moved back to Michigan. Mm-hmm. And there was a study abroad program to go to Japan for 2 weeks for a sociology credit. And so I jumped on that immediately because this was actually the first time they were offering this trip. Mm-hmm. So I went to Japan for 2 weeks, had an absolutely amazing time. The country was just incredible. And I was always a fan of sushi and just getting to try the sushi and all the other foods there. And I think that's what really kind of started off for me. That's what really gave me that travel bug. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it wasn't very much longer before I had graduated. And I was thinking about something that I wanted to do after I had finished school. And I was an elementary education major. And by the time I had graduated, this was back in like 2011, the job market for teachers in Michigan was just absolutely terrible. Far more licensed teachers than there were jobs for everybody. So one thing led to another, and eventually I decided to join the Peace Corps because I found out that the Peace Corps was looking for education volunteers. And I'm like, well, great. I just so happen to have skills in that. So and I thought to myself, this would be a great chance to spend a couple years to actually do something, not be unemployed, and then hopefully come back to the U.S. afterwards with a bit of a competitive edge.
Yeah.
So I went through a very, very daunting application process. It took me like literally about a year to apply for Peace Corps. It was easier for me to join the Marine Corps than it was to join the Peace Corps.
Really? Wow.
If you can believe that. Yeah. And so I ended up moving to the Gambia in West Africa in 2012. And I lived there for 2 whole years in a rural African village, and like a little bit in like the eastern side of the Gambia. Now, for a lot of the listeners, they're probably thinking, the Gambia, like, where the hell's that, right? Well, it turns out it's actually the smallest country on the entire African continent. It is in West Africa, and it's completely engulfed by Senegal. So you'd have to look a little bit closely on your map to find it. Yeah, but it's certainly there.
Awesome. So what about that experience really, what was the defining moment within that experience that said, you know what, I'm going to forego all the, the normal comforts that many people, like to have in their life here in the U.S. and just live this life on the edge, a life of adventure. What was that defining moment for you?
Well, I think a lot of it was just simply the fact that I learned that I'm able to get by with less. Because I think, especially in a first world country like the United States, obviously we rely a lot on our comforts. We rely on our cars, our air conditioning, our electricity, our television, our internet, and just so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on. But when I was living in my village, I had a house that was a square hut that was basically just one square room that probably wasn't much larger than like many people's kitchens,
Yeah.
Really, really small house, no electricity, no running water. If I had to get water, I actually had to grab buckets and pails and walk to a communal water tap in the village that would only come on like 2 hours every single day. There was just a 2-hour window where I was able to collect water, and I would have to bring it back to my house, allocate it. It's like, okay, I'm going to use this water to bathe with. I'm going to use this water to drink. I'm going to use this to wash clothes. And then at first it seemed a little bit frustrating, but then eventually it just came to a point where it's like, this is great because I'm still, getting everything I need, but, I don't have to pay any bills. I don't have to, pay an electric bill or a water bill, or my Peace Corps had issued me a mountain bike that I rode everywhere, and, I didn't have to put gas in a car, and I also got in very good shape.
Yeah.
So even though I don't want to use the word deprived from all of these, I guess, first world pleasures, is just something about it just felt like liberating, because I had realized that, I'm able to live with very little. And obviously I really kind of looked at the other villagers, my host family especially, as kind of like an example where they seem so happy. It's like, a lot of people would think, well, how can those kids be so happy if they don't have, an Xbox or a PS4 or whatever? It's like, well, I don't know, except I see a lot of these Gambian children are a hell of a lot more happy than a lot of like the American children that I have seen like throughout my tenure as a teacher. So it was pretty amazing. But yeah, I'd have to say just being able to get by with less, and also, I guess, embrace a little bit more of a minimalistic lifestyle was definitely a key highlight from my service.
Yeah, I can imagine you don't have a lot of patience now for the entitlement attitude that we have in this country these days, it seems like.
Yeah, I tell you what, it was a little bit of a rough transition when I had first come home. Now, we actually have a running joke in the Peace Corps where we say, it's not a 2-year commitment. It's actually a 4-year commitment. 1 whole year for the application process, 2 years of actually living and working in country, and 1 year to try to get readjusted to being back in a first world setting. And they weren't kidding. That was definitely what had happened when I had first moved back to the U.S. because there was actually a certain instance that had happened. So, and I'll share this with you all now, but I was at a restaurant and I heard this woman in the restaurant. She was complaining to everyone that she was sitting around the table with that she didn't like the taste of her ice water. And I'm getting a little bit like, I'm like, oh my gosh, because this made me think about my service and then how much, like, simply just getting water was, you had to work for it every single day. You know, I had mentioned getting it from the taps, and it also made me think of my host sister. Her name was Numa. A lot of times when I'd have to go to the water tap to collect water, she'd be out there too, like collecting water for my host family. And so she couldn't lift the buckets by herself. So what I would do is I would help her hoist it up, and she would balance them on her head. And then she would walk back to the house while balancing on her head, and one of my host mothers would be there to help her out. And the funny thing about this story is that Numa is just 10 years old. Doing all of this.
Wow.
And then yet here I am sitting in this restaurant and hearing this woman complain about ice water. You know, ice water in this nice air-conditioned restaurant that she didn't even have to work for, that someone brought to her. And I'm just thinking to myself, if she's getting bent out of shape about ice water, it's like, how well does she handle when, you know, shit really hits the fan in her life and things actually do go wrong, right?
Yeah. Like how would she handle like the tap water going out, or, you know, simple things like that? I mean, I know we talked about this a little bit pre-show, but like that really, you know, this hurricane that, you know, we almost went through here in Charleston, kind of fizzled out when it got here, but like we were ordered to evacuate, and it really was eye-opening to see how ill-prepared people are when even some of the most basic things go awry. So yeah, I definitely can appreciate your experience there, and you probably have a deeper sense of appreciation for that type of stuff.
Yeah, I tell you what, man, you know, because, you know, a lot of people aren't really prepared for something like that to go wrong, because it is something that we take for granted. Because it is something where people would much rather reach in the fridge to grab a beer than they would to, you know, get fresh water from their tap. And so, but I tell you what, nothing, and I mean, at least very few things fuck with your head more than being deprived of a basic need like water in this case, because there was actually a time in my village where the water taps scattered throughout my village, they're actually run by solar panels. And there was one instance where the electrical system that connected the solar panels to the pumps failed, and I was literally not able to collect water for 3 days. And so basically I had to ration whatever water I had. I couldn't bathe, I couldn't wash dishes or clothes, and I couldn't work out like I normally do because it's 107 degrees there, and you know, I can't afford to sweat out, you know, precious fluids. I need my body to retain them. So, but I tell you what, man, by day 3, oh my gosh, it's like I was a ticking time bomb. It's just like nothing has ever fucked with my head nearly as much as thinking that I'm not going to be able to drink water, or that I might run out of water. So it's definitely something that I had to contend with. Fortunately, they did come back on, but that was definitely a rough moment in my service.
Yeah, I imagine it's not like you call your local handyman electrician to come and plug the solar panels back in. It probably takes days just to get a hold of someone. You know, how did you guys communicate to I guess the closest civilized area? Well, you know, did they have to send runners, or were there satellite phones? What was that like?
Well, actually, strangely enough, there actually was a couple of mobile providers there in the Gambia that actually did kind of reach out pretty far. Well, in my village, for instance, my village was a little bit more on the upside. Like I mentioned that we had solar panels that were powering our taps, but you know, a little interesting side story is that the predominant tribal group that made up my village was a tribe called the Sarahules. And the Sarahules in the Gambia are a little bit known for their entrepreneurial endeavors. You know, they would have like some family members travel to Spain, earn money, and come back here to help develop the village. So we even had like a nearby cell tower because we were a little bit more, I guess, upscale. And I kind of put that in quotations,
Yeah.
So I actually had a cell phone that Peace Corps had issued me, and it was the same thing for the other volunteers as well. But even then, communication was pretty limited. It was mostly just limited to the other volunteers. I could call home with my phone, but it was really, really expensive. I mean, I would probably spend like about $20 just to talk to someone for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And of course, like being a volunteer, you don't get that high of a salary. So what? And then also, no one back home could call me. If I called them and they didn't answer, then that's it. I'm shit out of luck. So
Right on. Well, I know we're getting down in the weeds here, but the next question I wanted to ask you is, what adventures did you go on after the Peace Corps? How did you start setting your life up to continue this lifestyle, I guess?
Well, as I had mentioned, when I had came back to Michigan, I was definitely kind of having a hard time readjusting, and it didn't really take very long at all it didn't really take very long at all before I decided that I wanted to do something like that again. Because I had just changed so much just from having this experience. And then I come back to my hometown and I'm around, loved ones and familiar faces, but nothing has changed like very much on their part. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just I had a really hard time fitting in. So it certainly wasn't very long at all before I was looking to get abroad again or do something like that. And I ended up changing a little bit of a career path. Like I wasn't really pursuing education very much anymore. I kind of reflected on what I had learned and what I've experienced in the Gambia as a Peace Corps volunteer. And I ended up deciding to pursue archaeology. But I didn't want to just do archaeology here in the States somewhere. I actually found a really good university in England that had a 1-year master's program for field archaeology, and I applied and got accepted. And
awesome.
of course, fortunately, GI Bill, I was able to get that covered. And if we have any veterans that are listening, the GI Bill will cover a fair amount of universities that are abroad. So if they're looking for potential adventure while pursuing an education, that's certainly a possibility. But so I decided to go to the University of York, which is in the northern part of England. And I lived out there for a whole year as well, and went and pursued my master's degree and got to explore a little bit of Europe, a little bit of the UK during that time. So the adventure continued from there.
Awesome. So why archaeology? This seems like quite a shift. Education major, Marine, Peace Corps. Why did you choose that?
Yeah, I certainly jumped from war to peace to archaeology. So, well, I think it's just, I think I'm just really a very curious person. And a lot of that also it did kind of stem from my time in the Gambia, just what I got to learn about this country that I've never heard of before until I was actually invited to go there, to a culture that I've never interacted with before, with a language I never even knew existed, that not even a percentage of the world population actually speaks. It definitely led me to ask the question, well, what else is out there? And now, unfortunately, in this day and age, the world has been pretty well mapped out. But so there's not really much left out there in terms of discovery and satiating like curiosity these days. But with archaeology, there's a lot of work still going on to where, people are always like looking for evidence of past civilizations and seeing what else we can learn about those who occupied this world before us. And it definitely kind of came to fruition when I was actually in England. I was part of an excavation. We were actually excavating the site of an old Roman military fort, potentially a cavalry fort. And I unearthed a piece of pottery called Crambeck ware. Now, Crambeck ware is very distinct in its style. Like if you find it, it's tied to the Romans. So we're talking that this piece of pottery was lost and unknown to the world for nearly 2,000 years, before till I found it. It's like, yes, me. It's like I'm the one that's like I'm the first person to handle this thing in like nearly 2 millennia.
Yeah.
And it's like I found that. So it's just one of those really just exciting and amazing feelings, and I'm certainly like looking forward to doing more of it as I continue on, because that's actually what my current job is right now. I'm an archaeologist based down here in Tallahassee, Florida, and trying to explore places here in the Southeast.
Yeah. So what places here stateside have you been? What's, I guess maybe to kind of narrow it down, what's been your most exciting dig or project that you've worked on here in the States?
Well, I think it would actually probably be the first one that I had done when I was stateside. It was actually in New Mexico in the Santa Fe National Forest. And what we were doing what was called a pedestrian survey, where we're just literally just walking and covering certain areas and distinct lines, looking for artifacts that are right on the surface. And I remember the coolest artifact that I found there, and well, for one, it's just the scenery was just breathtaking. Like I'm on top of this mesa, looking over all of this forest. That like I'm up really high, looking at all this huge, expansive forest. So I had a great lunchtime view, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up finding a projectile point, or at least that's how we refer to it as an archaeologist. I mean, most people would refer to them as arrowheads. And it was made out of obsidian, which, if there's any Game of Thrones fans on here, dragon glass is right. What I had found. I had even made the joke saying, you think that way back then they were collecting these things to fend off the White Walkers? But so yeah, anyway, a little side joke there. But I just thought that was like so amazing. And once again, I had the same feeling that I had when I was in England. It's like, how long has this been here before someone else had picked this up before me? It's like, did like the last person who'd used this like hundreds or thousands of years ago, like drop it here, and then now I'm the first person to pick it up after all that time? So that was definitely a huge highlight for me.
Yeah, it really kind of gives you the perspective of, the U.S. here, we are probably the most developed country in the world, yet there's still these, such vast wilderness out there that, very few people probably, have stepped foot on. Probably less than 1,000 people probably were in the same location you've been at any one point in time. So it really kind of gives you that, I guess, that perspective that, yeah, you know what, there's just so much out there, beyond your desk job or, your mansion or your white picket fence. So, I mean, that's, that just seems like such a cool gig that you got going on there.
Yeah, it certainly is. And kind of going along with like what you just said is that, when a lot of people kind of get caught in those, I guess I would say, like routines, or I don't know if I'd call them routines. I guess I would call them like cycles, right? Go into work, punch the clock, go home, pop open a beer and, sit down and like watch the game. And, it's just, it's almost, it's a shame to see like so many people who would just kind of commit to a life like that, even though there's so much like out there to explore, to see, to do. And it's not a very fulfilling, like, because I've been down that road before. Like like I said, it kind of took a while before I kind of got my adventurous spirit, and now it's kind of hard to not do those things. It's like if I stay put for too long, or if I just get too caught in that cycle, I start to feel complacent, and quite frankly, sometimes I start to just feel weak and very unfulfilled. And so it's like sometimes you almost have to kind of keep that adventure going, because you mentioned earlier on in this episode that experiences are what you're going to reflect on and remember and carry with you for the rest of your lives. Things like material possessions, stuff that you owned, years ago. You're not going to think about any of that stuff. You're going to be telling people about like, that time you got lost in, I don't know, Amsterdam, or, wherever it is that you might go, or that, little mishap that you had while trying to go out and seek adventure. You're going to remember those things.
Yeah.
Those are the stuff that you're going to carry with you, not those material possessions that a lot of people would try to collect to keep up with the Joneses, or try to make all this money just to try to fill their house with,
Yeah. You said it so perfectly there is, there, there's just so much out there, and I just implore everyone who might be listening to this is to just start thinking of ways. You may not have to go to the lengths that you just talked about, going studying in England, but what are some ways that that you tell people that they can start to cultivate this adventurous spirit? If maybe someone's listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, hey, you know what, I'm stuck in this job. What advice can you maybe one or two pro tips that you can lend to these folks to get them started down this life of adventure path?
Well, if that's something that you really want for yourself, simply put, you have to make it a non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
Like non-negotiables in your life, as far as we have them as far as, let's say, paying our bills, paying for our insurance, and so on and so forth. Those are non-negotiables. You have to meet those. But but you and I, especially, with you and us kind of being on the path of fitness, you and I, we talked about this a little bit, is like, going to the gym. We make those non-negotiables because, we need to make those things happen because we know how much it enhances their lives. Well, you got to look at adventure sort of like the same way, where it's like, if that's really what you want to see for yourself or have in your life, and that can really be applied to anything else for that matter, is you have to make it a non-negotiable. And I also like to talk about creating a vision. I look 3 years down the line. Like 5 is a little bit too far out there. 1 is kind of cutting it a little bit too short. I kind of like to look at 3 years and kind of, that seems to be like a good healthy medium right there. And I visualize the person that I am, and also like, what am I doing at that point? It's like, how do I look? How do I look physically? Where have I been? Where am I going to? I think about all of these things. And then I ask myself in the present moment, what decisions would that person make? Like, would he make the decision to, let's buy this nice big flat screen TV rather than putting the money away for a plane ticket? It's just like there's all these like little decisions that you can make in the moment that obviously kind of move the needle to going and doing those things and kind of living a fulfilling life of adventure. And, there's a couple of tools that you can do that, because I know like one of the things that really sort of deters a lot of people, or really kind of gets in a lot of people's way, is finances, especially. There's certain like apps out there that you use and that I've implemented to kind of help me like set aside like money kind of like on the side, with not necessarily without my knowledge, but I didn't really have to think about it very much. Like I like to use Capital, and that's Capital with a Q. You can set up like automated funds where if you spend like a certain amount of money, it rounds up to like the nearest $5 and sends the difference over to this fund that you've created. Uh-huh. You can put like automatic things, like I say, like every week I want $50 to go towards a travel fund, and it just kind of builds up over time. And then when time comes when you do want to travel, that money's there. And there's also a lot of ways to travel and to explore and to have adventures without really spending like a whole lot of money. There's like, I'm not necessarily an expert in travel hacking per se, and budget travel, I will admit, is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I have had some experience with it. Mm-hmm. There's hostels where I've literally paid like $20 a night to stay at. And there's a lot of budget airlines where you probably won't get like a lot of like we've been talking about comforts. You probably won't get like, the high class in-flight service or a movie screen or anything like that, but it'll get you there. So there's definitely a lot of ways like out there, but I think a lot of people are really quick to jump the gun that say, oh, well, I can't afford to travel, or, oh, I don't have time to travel. I can't get time off work and, this, that, and the other, and then they'll just stop right there. There's that saying that I absolutely love, and that is, I will find a way or I will make one.
Yeah.
And if you don't think that there's a way immediately, don't just, stop it right there. Make a way. It's certainly possible.
Yeah. So what is your favorite, I guess, talking about some of these tips? Everyone talks about like credit cards and travel reward points. Do you have any favorite credit cards or anything like that, or do you think that's a bunch of hogwash?
Well, it's certainly not hogwash. I mean, it's personally not something that I've really implemented in like very much like myself. I guess maybe because I haven't necessarily really had to, because I mean, obviously with being in the Gambia, Peace Corps paid for my flight out there, and then it was, it's a relatively cheap country to live in. And when I was in living in the UK, you get like really like dirt cheap flights to fly anywhere in Europe. Like it's like basically I got like round trip from Manchester, England to Tenerife in Spain for like maybe just a little over $100.
Oh, wow.
And so it's so I think I just I haven't really looked into a whole lot of like those. I know a lot of, but I guess I will speak for what I've observed from other travelers and travel bloggers is that I think like Capital One, like the Venture card is a pretty popular choice because you get like those mile rewards. I'm myself more personally a fan of cashback rewards, but mostly because they don't have annual fees. But I certainly kind of think that you might get a little bit more bang for your buck if you were to go to like, let's say like a Venture card, where even though you have like an annual fee, which I want to say, and I don't have numbers in front of me, it's maybe around $60 a year. Yeah. But so those are certainly other things too. But I'd say like the best way for me that I've saved money is that, I think I was just, like I said, I was willing to give up a little bit of the luxuries along the way, which personally, I think that makes adventures a little bit more authentic. It's like, I personally do not feel that you're getting the experience of traveling to a foreign country and then staying in an all-inclusive resort, that's just, my personal take on it. Some people might disagree and, that's fine. But if I travel to a country, I'm there to see it. I'm not there to spend time in a hotel room. So I've always viewed like whatever lodging I have as simply as a place to sleep and secure my things, nothing more. And so therefore I would always opt for like, the very simple, basic budget hotels, Motel 6 or whatever, along the way versus like, the Hilton or the Ritz or any of those places. Again, not bashing those places by any means, but, I think for me to be successful and to obviously, I'm not rich by any means, but, I just been willing to kind of make those compromises so I can go out and get what I want. And that is to travel and explore.
Yeah. I mean, there's, hotels are a dime a dozen, so you don't need to travel to some exotic resort if you want to get away and just sleep in a hotel for a night, which, that can be fun on its own. But, you don't need to spend thousands of dollars to travel to a tropical island just to spend time in your hotel room. So, well, Josh, we are starting to run a little short on time. I would love to continue this conversation for hours, but we simply don't have that much time. But I wanted to leave a little bit of time so you can let the listeners know how to get in touch with you and any other things any other resources that you might have to offer to them.
Right. Well, my website is allaroundadventure.com. That's just one word with no dashes, .com. And there you'll able to find the podcast, or you can also search for the podcast on iTunes. And actually, you yourself, Kenyon, have been a guest on the podcast before. That episode has now been published. So if the listeners kind of want to see, like, I guess, the prelude to the episode they're listening to right now, they can go in and find that there. And I'm also on Instagram's kind of my main one, and Facebook, and I'm on both of those, just All Around Adventure. Once again, one word with no dashes. And I'm on Twitter, and my username there is All Around Advent. I couldn't quite fit the URE at the end because Twitter doesn't allow for a very long username. Right. So All Around Advent there. And so, yeah, by all means, do free to follow. I post episodes weekly. I have like 2 shows. I have an interview show, and then I also have another show that I call the blog readings, and that's where I actually read my blog posts, and those will include like my travel tips or other insights or philosophies that I have surrounding travel that the listeners can take from that as well. So yeah, by all means, do free to follow.
Awesome. I'll drop links in the show notes for everyone to make it easy and not have any excuses to not follow Josh here. But I just wanted to have one last wrap-up question here for you, Josh. What's the number one thing on your bucket list?
The number one thing on my bucket list is to go to all 7 continents. And so far, I've done 4. I lived on 3. Right now, it is Australia, South America, and Antarctica that has eluded me thus far. And right now, I'm actually in the process of planning to check off South America next.
Awesome. Well, again, Josh, appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us here. And I'll, like I said, I'll make sure all the links and resources that you mentioned here on the show get put in the show notes. And again, appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, it was great to be here, man. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Zero Excuses podcast. Join the conversation at KenyonZitska.com in our Facebook group. And don't forget to rate and subscribe to our show. We'll talk to you next week. And always remember, results, not excuses.